Hello there, my name is Gary Friedman and welcome to the Friedman Archives blog. Today I'm going to share with you what I consider to be some of the most influential cameras that Sony has ever introduced. And we have lots to cover, so let's just get right into it. This is the Sony Mavica. Remember those? It wasn't quite digital. All your images here were stored on a floppy disk. I think there's one here. New Year's Eve 2004. Now all I gotta do is figure out some way to read this. Anyway, not on this table, but worthy of mention, is the Sony R1, which was a bridge camera, one of the first ones ever to have an APS-C size sensor in it, and a 24 to 120 millimeter Zeiss lens. It was a great design, it was high integrity, and it even had a little tiny LCD display on the back at an angle so you can shoot from unusual angles. That was showing innovation. After Sony bought Minolta, the very first camera they came out with was this. This is the Alpha 100, which is actually a completely redesigned version of the Konica Minolta 5D. The button layout on the back is pretty much the same. The biggest difference is the 5D had a 6 megapixel sensor, and this one had a 10 megapixel. It was a CCD, charge coupled device. That was great when the light was good, but when the light wasn't quite so good, when you had to use high ISO, a CMOS sensor would have been the preferred solution, and that's what they put into the Alpha 700 here. Now, for those of us who used to shoot with Minolta, they loved the Alpha 700 because the button layout was so close to that of the Konica Minolta 7D here, which I love to use. This was 6 megapixel, but have a look at the button layout. You can see what DP Review used to call the Minolta DNA. It's there, and the button layout was great and was a nice old friend to pick up and use. How can we carry things further? Sony was wanting to get into the DSLR business and they wanted to shake up the world, so they decided to make a full frame 24 megapixel camera. This is the Alpha 900. And to shake things up a little bit, this is the first 24 megapixel full frame camera to actually cost less than $3,000. But that's not important. Here's what's important. This mirror is so big and it slaps so much, it has this really nice, cognitive, satisfying kerchunk whenever you take a picture. Now for those of you who are into cash register sounds, this is just as satisfying. Anyway, there's another one here worthy of mention that's not on my table because I loaned it out to my nephew. It was the Alpha 300. What makes it noteworthy is it was the first one to implement live view using a small camera that they put into the pentaprism that looks down into the focusing screen and then takes that image and puts it onto the back of the camera here. And you had a little switch up on top, so you can either view using the viewfinder or you can see a live view on the back of your display. It was a very innovative solution, but they still wanted to be able to have autofocus during movies, and that wasn't the best solution for it. So another earth-shattering invention happened. This here is the Alpha 55. This, along with the Alpha 35, were the first translucent camera lenses to go in there. It's technically not a DSLR because there's no mirror in there that flips up and down. There's a semi-transparent mirror here, which lets 1/3 of the light in and then bounces up to a phase detector array, while 2/3 of the light goes straight through to the sensor, giving you live view feed to your electronic viewfinder, and also allowing you to take movies without losing the benefit of phase detect autofocus. It's the best of both worlds. What a great design. Well, the photo industry wasn't too sure about what a great revolution this was. Everybody was skeptical. You're going to lose 1/3 of your light? And DP Review was really worried about ghosting showing up if you have specular highlights somewhere off, and they tried very hard to look for it, and they couldn't find any. So this unusual invention has now a great track record accumulated behind it. This camera came out about the same time as the Alpha 500, which is a conventional DSLR with a flipping mirror. Based solely on my book sales, I can tell you that this SLT architecture proved to be an awful lot more popular, and then ever since this came out, they stopped making DSLRs. And there was SLT from then on. Refining this concept a little further, there's a tie between the Alpha 99 II and the Alpha 77 II. Both are SLT architectures, both are big and heavy, but they also are satisfying to use because they have the ergonomics of the EMount. Now I should mention that this here is the Alpha 99 and this here is the Alpha 77 Version 2 I'm using to videotape this right now, so it's a good stand-in. But these are a logical conclusion and wonderful engineering, the best camera bodies you can have for putting your legacy A-mount glass onto. Let's talk about the E-mount. This was Sony's idea to say, you know, we can't really graph video onto the A-mount. It's kind of running out of steam. Great for stills, though. Let's design a lens mount from the ground up that's really good for video as well as for stills, and also is really svelte and tiny and lightweight, because that's what people want when they're upgrading from their smartphones. So they came up with this platform here. This was called NEX. It's an APS-C sensor with what they call the E-mount. The great thing about the E-mount, oh, I should mention, this here used the same sensor as the 24 megapixel Alpha 77. You can understand the benefits of the E-mount in terms of size and weight and portability. Since it's wonderful image quality, 24 megapixels in this little tiny thing. That was a earth-shattering thing. The other great thing about the E-mount platform is they had a lot of room left over. What they call the flange distance between the lens mount and the sensor is very, very small, leaving a lot of room for an adapter. So if you have a lot of legacy glass sitting in your apartment or your attic somewhere, and you want to be able to adapt it to this camera body, you can do it. One of the unexpected sources of sales for the E-mount was, in fact, people who had legacy glass. Even Leica photographers discovered that the Sony bodies could get better images from the Leica glass than the Leica bodies could. That's cool. So the E-mount's been refined a little bit. The A6000 series was one of the most best selling for Sony. The one I'm holding here is the Alpha 6500. It hasn't gotten too much bigger from the original concept, but they were able to squeeze in 4K shooting and image stabilization in the body as well as in the lens, so you can actually correct for more different kinds of shake. And they did it without overheating and without using up too much battery power. So these things are engineering marvels. What else? Well, they took the E-mount and they stuck a full-frame lens in there. This is the original Alpha 7. Not too much bigger than the A6000, but look at that. This set the world on fire, but it was also a really strange design. The shutter release button wasn't where your fingers expected to find it. Some of the user interface needed a little bit of work, but this still started the trend. Next is a tie. We have the Alpha 7R II, which is a 42 megapixel wonder, and again, and a really svelte little camera body. It's amazing what they had done. And like everything else, it shoots 4K video and the images are stabilized 2 different ways. And then we have the Alpha 9, which is 24 megapixel full frame, but it's designed especially for birds in flight, sports shooting. It's good for landscapes too, but being able to shoot 20 frames per second and still be able to track a subject that moves unpredictably is an engineering marvel, especially when you consider the fact that the E-mount platform always previews your image with the f-stop at its current state. And it's much more difficult for autofocus to do its thing while the f-stop is actually closed down. So Sony has solved a lot of technical hurdles to be able to produce these engineering wonders. So that's my assessment of the most influential Sonys. There's one honorable mention, which I like to bring up. The most underloved camera that Sony has ever produced. And I'm talking about this here. This is the RX10 II. Now this morning, they announced the RX10 version 4. What's the RX10? Well, here is the RX100, the best point and shoot on the planet. It uses that very famous 1-inch sensor. And if your light's good, I've taken images from this camera and blown it up to poster size, and nobody can tell it was taken with a small sensor camera. So it's this camera and sensor with a really big lens put in front. The RX10 IV has a 24 to 600 millimeter lens. It's a Zeiss lens. It's outstanding, and the same 1-inch sensor. It also has the same performance specifications as the A9. About 20 megapixels. You can shoot 25 frames per second, and the same phase detect focus tracking algorithms that the A9 uses. So you can actually take publishable, really good images, track along with the best of them for 1/5 of the price of this amazing A9. Photojournalists and sports shooters in high schools and colleges around the country should be flocking to this once it comes out. It's also great for 4K video. It's a really, anyway, great travel camera. So you got an idea. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this overview, and I hope I don't get too much hate mail from people who say, my favorite camera isn't on your list. Rah, 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 rah. That's that. Feel free to leave your feedback in the comments. Thanks for watching.